Paul gets another win, this time over Anderson Silva. What's going on, everybody? Paulie Malignaggi for Paulie TV. And Jake Paul, the winning streak continues. The march goes on. The trek continues. What do you think? I mean, what is there to think about Jake Paul and what he's doing in boxing? Obviously, yes, he's not fought a boxer yet. And, you know, hindsight is always 20/20, but we got to give credit here because he's now beating a guy who everyone considered a striker, a guy that I really couldn't fathom Jake beating. And, you know, he beat him, and he beat him non-controversial. He got a knockdown in the last round as well. But and in a fight where you can see that he's improved since his last fight against Tyron Woodley in the rematch. You know, conditioning wise, he's improved. Also in his ability to you know, just move around the ring, be a little bit more comfortable. Listen, he could always look a bit even more comfortable. He's got a long way to go, but definitely looked a lot more comfortable moving around the ring and boxing in general. I gotta say, regardless of this, it's a good win. It's a step up in competition from his previous opponents, and the step ups in competition have been consistent here for Jake Paul, and I think that's why he's getting a lot of attention, and you know, his fan base continues to grow. Obviously, I don't think he's going to be mistaken for a world-class fighter anytime soon, or world-class boxer anytime soon, but nonetheless, you got to give credit for beating the kind of opposition he's beating and continuing to beat these kind of guys as he moves forward in his trek towards you know, better competition. Who knows where this journey ends? You know, we do know that what's obvious is that his dedication has been obvious because he's gotten better every time we've seen him fight. Yeah, I know the naysayers will say he's got a long way to go, and he does. Believe me, I'll tell you. You know, I actually watched the Lomachenko fight first, and then I went to watch Jake Paul after, and I mean, after watching the Lomachenko fight and going into the Jake Paul fight, you could just see the difference in quality was, you know, like night and day as far as the way these two guys are moving around the ring and the way Lomachenko and Ortiz are moving around the ring. But nonetheless, especially to watch them back to back. But nonetheless, it's still impressive. Still impressive. Not only that he's getting these wins, beating bona fide fighters, even if they're a little bit past their prime or retired MMA guys, and doing it, you know, despite the pressure that's on him, the media microscope that's on him, and so on and so forth. Having said that, analyzing the fight from a technical standpoint, I thought the youth of Jake Paul was really a big difference here. The energy of a youth is something that is sometimes underrated. I call it youthful excitement, youthful energy. I remember I first used this expression when Amir Khan beat me when he was 23 years old. I think I was about 29 years old when Amir beat me, and I could just tell the insane energy that a young fighter has. He's just always ready to initiate or always ready to respond when you attack him. You know, it's that youth energy that you kind of lose when you get older. You start to, not, I wouldn't say overthink, but you become more of a veteran thinker as you get a little bit older, and you lose that youth energy, and that youth energy can be really advantageous to you. As a matter of fact, Lomachenko dealt with it in the Jermaine Ortiz fight last night as well. There was also a big part of the problem was Jermaine Ortiz's youthful energy, and I think Jake Paul's youthful energy was a big difference in the fight last night against Anderson Silva, where he's moving quicker, he's more explosive. Anderson has his little craftiness, but Jake has clearly that energy level and that explosiveness and the intent, the meaner intent of a youth, you know, who's trying to accomplish it's still something that it's not something you can really define, but it's something that you can easily see if you're really paying attention for. And I thought I noticed that in the Jake Paul Anderson Silva fight last night, as well as the Lomachenko and Jermaine Ortiz fight last night. The older guys were just out energized by the younger guys. Now, obviously, in the Lomachenko fight, Lomachenko's veteran savviness eventually did pull through, but Anderson Silva doesn't have enough boxing experience to pull through with that savviness that he may have wanted to show against Jake Paul. And Jake Paul's energy level, boxing skills carried the day and even got the knockdown late in the fight. One thing I don't want to say I overrated Anderson's boxing ability, but watching him fight last night, here's the thing that I noticed that the Showtime commentators were all sleeping on, not surprisingly since I've been gone. The biggest thing that I noticed last night with Jake and Anderson was Anderson, despite his athletic ability, still doesn't march forward and backwards like a boxer because he's never been a boxer. Obviously in MMA you got to watch for kicks and things like, and takedowns and things like that. So the way he walks around the ring is differently than a boxer would. So he almost doesn't have the correct kind of judgment as far as knowing how to punch his way into punching range and into distance, into the danger zone, into the distance. So despite all the athleticism that he has, he's still the kind of guy who likes to get there first and then punch. At least when it comes to punches. Maybe if there were kicks in the middle, he'd be more comfortable working his way into striking distance. But when it comes to just using your hands, or just a boxing range, he wasn't really understanding of how to work his way into boxing striking range by punching his way into it or feinting his way into it correctly so that he can work his way into it smoothly and then punch right off of that. He was trying to he was trying to get close first, then punch. And he was doing it consistently. What was happening was he was trying to get to Jake. He would get to Jake, but Jake would hit him first. Because Anderson is not initiating that distance closing with any kind of punching or with any kind of deception, because maybe he doesn't know how, because boxing wise he just never had to do it with just his fists, you know. And despite all the athletic ability, listen, this is probably something that could have been teachable to Anderson Silva a couple of decades ago, but he's 47 years old. You're not going to teach an old dog new tricks, especially a dog this old. And so I think we were sort of mesmerized with Anderson's athleticism, and when it comes to a hand-to-hand fight, we didn't really realize that he's actually lacking big time in this understanding and cognizance of closing the distance with using deception of either punches, feints, level changes, something, instead of just trying to get into punching range and then get into exchange. And that's what he would end up doing. He wound up in exchanges, and Jake's quicker, more explosive attack of the youthfulness that he has ended up getting the better of those exchanges and even getting a knockdown in the last round. But, you know, Anderson had some success. But again, it just goes to show you, like, you know, something of like what could have been, you know, because he was making this mistake constantly. I don't think he had a corner that really understood this either. The commentators definitely didn't understand it because they didn't bring it out at all in all 8 rounds. And I think that was the biggest key in the fight, the most glaring thing in the fight that made Jake's boxing ability superior to Anderson's was the fact that Anderson's boxing ability is almost an illusion, a mirage, due to the athleticism that he's always had. But boxing-wise, he just didn't have this cognizance, even though physically he should probably have the understanding and the ability to have these, to have this know-how, to have this mechanism in his boxing style. It's a guy who's never really used a lot of boxing before, and not that he's never used a lot of boxing. He's used a lot of striking in his MMA career, but it's been kicks and it's been different things. So once you use kicks in the middle, your range and your ability to close range changes. The way you adapt to range and close range starts to change when you've got to deal with kicks and takedowns. But when it comes to just hand-to-hand fighting, there's a certain mechanism that boxers obviously have mastered because they've been doing it for so many years. When it comes to Anderson, he probably has to change so many things that you have to break old habits and then create new ones. It's just not enough time in a training camp. While Jake has been working strictly boxing for so long that his ability to do this was better, and of course that youthful energy also allowed him to have that explosiveness to control that distance changing and like I said, when the times that Anderson did get close, it was Jake getting off first because Anderson wasn't deceptively closing the gap. He was just trying to come forward. And then a lot of times, even when that happened, he was just coming forward. They wound up in exchanges because it's not like he deceived Jake and all of a sudden Jake is at a bad angle and Anderson has entered the punch zone and he's able to get those punches off and now Jake is trapped and he's in a defensive position. No, a lot of times Anderson would just get there. Jake would either throw first or they'd both start throwing it. They wind up in an exchange. When a guy who's as athletic as Anderson Silva should never be in any kind of exchanges in a boxing match. He's good enough to pick spots and counter and sharp and be deceptive. But he wasn't able to do this because he just did not have the recognition and the cognizance to do this. I don't know if they even worked on this in camp. I don't know if his trainers ever brought this up. It was definitely not brought up in the corner. And like I said, it was never brought up in the broadcast as well. So, I mean, and I think that was the biggest difference maker, obviously, and along with Jake's ability to take advantage of it through being helped with being the younger, more physically adept, more explosive guy. The knockdown was a cherry on top for Jake. I thought Jake was up as we were going into the last round. I had to give or take just about like Steve Farhood did. The knockdown was the exclamation point that made everything non-controversial. A good win for Jake Paul. And what does he move on from here? Does he finally take on a real boxer? Or is he going to keep on with the notoriety? I mean, obviously with Jake, it's a bit tricky when you pick opponents. He's obviously, if you're Jake's team and PR and management, you want him to get fights that he's going to win. But you don't want him to look bad where he's going backwards and he's regressing with his choice of opponents. But at the same time, you need to keep building him up in a way where his choice of opponents is respectable yet they won't beat him. This was a great choice because really this is a fight that a lot of people, including myself, thought he wasn't going to be able to win. I was basing it off the way they both looked in their last fight. I mean, first of all, I'll go to show you that Chavez Jr. is absolutely terrible. So I'm going to put it to you like this. If they were able to get Chavez Jr. a world championship somehow, boxing can be manipulated in so many ways that it's possible that, Jake Paul may one day be able to, be maneuvered into a title if there's enough money there. You know what I'm saying? And obviously Jake brings a lot of money because, I mean, just watch. Chavez Jr. was absolutely brutal against Anderson. And really, Chavez robbed about 5-6 guys on the way up the ladder. And so if those guys would have got the rightful decisions against him, guys like Troy Rowland, Brian Vera, and a few others, if those guys would have got decisions against Chavez, Chavez would have never been within a sniff of a world title fight. Instead, he got to a world title fight. And then, if everybody remembers the politics of that, Sebastian Zbik was the mandatory for Sergio Martinez, and HBO did not okay the Martinez versus Zbik fight. They said Zbik wasn't a recognizable enough opponent, so Sergio was not able to defend his title against Zbik, so he had to vacate the WBC title. The WBC would not make allowances to let him keep the title and not defend against Zbik, despite the fact that Sebastian Zbik was not a known enough commodity for HBO to okay. So once Sergio Martinez vacated that title that was rightfully his, the mandatory contenders now were Zbik and Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. All of a sudden, Zbik became a good enough fighter to be on HBO when it came to the opponent being Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. And so Chavez Jr. And Zbik fought for the vacant WBC title that Sergio was forced to vacate, and Chavez Jr. then ended up winning that title. And that's how they manipulated Chavez Jr. to win the world title, even after they manipulating him all the way to the title with, like I said, various decisions that he never even deserved. Can you do that with Jake Paul? So far, Jake Paul hasn't needed to rob anybody, but then again, Jake Paul hasn't fought any boxers yet. Again, respectable amount of step-ups in opposition. It's getting people talking, and his boxing is getting better. Keep in mind, this guy had no amateur career, though then again, neither did Chavez Jr., but Chavez Jr. had like bunch of pro fights by the time he fought for the title. I mean, let's face it, Chavez Jr. had fought a lot of pro fights, so he was given plenty of time to actually improve his boxing. If you give the way Jake Paul's improving, if you give Jake Paul 30 pro fights before he's fighting for a world title, I think he's gonna be a lot better than he is now. And honestly, I know when you think about it, a lot of boxing fans are like, oh, it's disgraceful. A YouTuber is getting all this attention in boxing, and he doesn't deserve it and everything. But wasn't it a disgrace when Chavez Jr. had to rob half a dozen guys on the way up the ladder to even get into a title shot that then he didn't deserve, that then HBO politicked and manipulated their way methodically into making so that Zbik and Chavez Jr. could fight for the title after making sure Sergio Martinez got stripped of the WBC title? Isn't that more disgraceful? I mean, when you think about it, then, I mean, all this guy's doing is beating the guys in front of him. He's stepping up. He's strategically finding guys that are popular, so you're going to watch him fight. And let's face it, we're all watching him, right? And he's getting better. I'm not mistaking him for a world-class guy, but again, can you picture Jake Paul with 30 pro fights? Do you remember what Chavez Jr. was on his way up the ladder? He was horrible, and yet they kept giving him decisions. He kept winning. He either beat bums or he was robbing middle tier guys, and then, they manipulated the situation. Even if you manipulate the situation for Jake Paul the way they manipulated it for Chavez Jr., I personally think you could eventually get Jake Paul some kind of title shot. Obviously, you need the atmosphere to be correct, meaning you need the right champions. You need a proper vacant title in the mix somewhere to where he can go fight a weak guy for it, just like Chavez Jr. was able to fight Sebastian Zbik for the vacant title. It's got to be manipulated in the right way, but boxing is such a scumbag sport that somehow it figures it out when it wants to, right? So, which is not praise for the sport or the business, by the way. I'm just saying that. Should we be surprised by any of it? Is all that I'm saying. So I don't think it's anything disgraceful. And like I said, I mean, I tuned to the Jake Paul fight after Lomachenko, and then I watched it again afterwards, from top to bottom, from start to finish. And honestly, right after the fight, watching Lomachenko and Jermaine Ortiz, I mean, you could tell there was miles of difference between the two fights, and the skill level was just completely different. So in closing, I overestimated Anderson Silva's athletic ability. I thought his athleticism would translate into athletic boxing. It did not, and mainly, again, it's that was because he didn't even have a cognizance or an understanding that you have to punch your way into distance. You do not get into distance and then punch, and he didn't know how to do that. And because he didn't know how to do that, he never tried to do that. He wound up in exchanges, which again, an athletic fighter should never be in exchanges because he's too athletic to wind up in exchanges. Athletic exchanges are situations you get yourself into because you got to take risks. A guy with the kind of athleticism Anderson Silva has shouldn't have to take those kind of risks, but he had to because he didn't understand the concept of cutting distance with just using your hands, and Jake Paul made him pay for it. More explosive, younger, just was throwing the meaner intentioned punches, and the knockdown at the end told you that as well. Paulie Malignaggi, this is Paulie TV. Let me know what's next for Jake Paul. He wants Nate Diaz. What do you guys think of it? He's still not fighting boxers. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Is it giving him a chance to improve and get better? Nate Diaz, again, he is a step up from Anderson Silva with hand skills, I'll tell you that much. And Nate Diaz was sparring with guys like Andre Ward and whatnot. So, granted, I don't know how shot Nate is, but nonetheless, everybody would agree Anderson was shot. So, nobody had a problem with watching that fight. So, he's continuing to find the right kind of opposition that will sell and is a marketing point while also continue to improve his own boxing. So shout out to BJ Flores for that. And as well as, picking the right opponents that keeps continuously stepping up. He's not stepping down in competition. He's stepping up in competition consistently, which I also find very, very interesting in this whole thing. Again, like, comment, subscribe, guys. Let me know your comments. Let me know what you think of all this. I know this is a highly debated topic, and your opinions run from you can't stand this too. This is pretty good, and it'll be good for boxing, to everything in between. I know that, and so I'm willing to kind of debate and hear them all out, because I don't think there's a right or wrong answer when it comes to this opinion on all this. But I think we'll all agree that we'll continue to be curious about Jake Paul. I'm Paulie Malignaggi, and this is Paulie TV.